sitting on a pair of Harbor Freight jack stands. My name's Tristan, and this is my 99 Chevy Blazer. Handy dandy black box here. That's just the colloquial designation for these primitive little solar calculators here that they used to run these Vortec engines back in the 90s. Fun thing about this is if I were doing just a traditional small block swap into this thing, putting a Vortec 350 in here, this would just be all plug and play. Like most of this harness would just swap over. 4.3 is basically a sawed off 350. I mean, the cylinders have the same displacement as the 350 cylinders. The block is the same width. It just tacks on 2 more cylinders. I could throw the Vortec harness on here to run 8 injectors and 8 cylinders. So dropping a Vortec 350 into this thing would be just simple. Other than having cool V8 sound and being able to do bigger burnouts than with a 4.3, I don't see any advantage to putting a Vortec 350 in here. So I'm going to put an LS in there. I'm going to continue by unlacing all this gobbledygook here and taking this plate of spaghetti out of here. I have a spreadsheet that tells me what every single one of these pins is on the black box, but first of all, I'm going to fidget with this thing. Jets! Stand by. Well, now. Yeah. Haha. Well, now. Look at that. Here. Come on now. Aha. Oh. There's a little tab on the bottom that you pull down on. And this thing just slides right out. Not that good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that was easy. Overboard turn. I make special pliers for these, but I'm cheap. Very small Chanel locks here. A pinch and wiggle. Not so hard that you crush your heater core inlets, because I really don't want to remove the dashboard. Okay, keep working at it. Do not break the heater hose. Oh, yeah, there we go. Yes, on my foot. Ooh, boy, that's everywhere. Fixed. So I bought this thing from, was convinced that it had a bad ground, and that's why it ran poorly, didn't have any power. But the thing was, the fuel pump was so weak that as soon as you put any throttle into it at all, the fuel pressure would drop down to almost nothing, and it would just go full lean. So the plan is to go drive-by-wire with this thing whenever I swap the new 5.3 in it. So I'm probably not going to need these cables, but never hurts to keep stuff because you never know what you might need at some point. On the EGR lines, so you got this monstrosity that comes down here to this little, well, I guess air injection lines. I don't know, I don't speak emissions. Air injection comes from this little goofy looking rubber baby buggy bumper down there. That's all got to go away now. Well, now I've had this. I skipped over all the boring stuff of digging through here and finding all the millions of different wires I missed, unhooking the transmission line, fighting with the exhaust manifold, dropping the cross member, and fighting with the fuel lines, and fighting with the training lines, and fighting with everything. And it's free. I also had to stop recording because I was swearing a lot. So it's been about, I don't know, 3 weeks. Last time I showed really anything on this thing, there were forest fires coming real close, and then I think it was that night that I packed up the family and got out of here. Thankfully, the place didn't burn down. I slapped some motor mounts on. Nice little Dirty Dingo mounts here. I went with the Dirty Dingo mounts because they were the only mounts that specifically went with the S10 Blazer, and I'll show you why that's important. If you look right here, there are these risers mounted to the frame right here, and what they do is basically just lift the mount up like, I don't know, inch and a half I don't really know why they exist, but Blazers have them and regular S10 pickups do not. Some Gee-Whiz information for you there. Of all the different mounts that are recommended, the Dirty Dingo ones are the only ones that have this. Now this also uses the 2.8 liter V6 engine mount, which is rubber. A lot of mixed reviews on whether or not those hold up under the weight of an LS engine. They're super cheap, and if you want to replace them with solid mounts or poly mounts, they're cheap too. And cheapest of all is me. I'm gonna start trying to slap the transmission on this thing. It currently has the 4.8 liter, 5.3 liter 4L60 style dished flex plate on it. I have the flat flex plate, but I do not have a crank spacer. Depending on what torque converter I go with, I may or may not need this, so I'm just going to leave that on for now and then take the flat flex plate off of the front of the 4L80. I'd like to go with, I believe it's a Circle D 245 millimeter billet torque converter, which runs around, I think, a 3200 stall. That's going to be the most expensive part of this project, really, is the torque converter, strangely enough. 4L80 has, like, I think it's a 254-to-1 first gear ratio. And so even with 410 gears in the rear, that's the setup I'm running in my Suburban 4L80E with 410 gears, and that thing will run all the way up to 45 miles per hour in first gear, no problem. It's an absolute turret off the line. I'd like it to launch hard. I'd really like to have the converter hit good and hard and maybe see some daylight under the front tires. That'd be really cool. I paid $180 for this 4L80E. I have no idea how many miles are on it, but just look at it. Came out of a 2007 Express van with a 4.8 liter in it. Look at it. Wasn't even shopping for a transmission that day. I stuck my head underneath it. I saw a 4L80E. It looked brand new. Look at it. Had to have it. Look at it. Back to doing stuff and things. Hachi machi, that hurts. Got a sharp edge on it. Yeah. The test fitness not only makes me feel better about my life, also tells me how much more I gotta beat in the firewall to make the transmission fit in there. And kind of gives me an idea how much room I'm looking at for headers, steering shaft clearance, where the accessories are gonna sit, any of that stuff. Right together. Let's hit it. Ooh, hard. Yeah. Yes. What on earth is this? There. Check it out. There she is. A whole lot more room in between that head and the heater box than I thought there'd be. Quite a bit of room between the engine and the firewall, honestly. And the transmission, well, it's got quite a bit of room too. Kind of surprised here. I bought this thing to do the Gambler 500 last year. My plan was to just take it out in the Gambler and beat on it and bomb through the woods and have a good old time. I'm not the type of guy who can ruin a car. I just can't do it. I'll drag home the most disgusting pile of junk and I will clean on it and fix it up and shine it and buff it and just give it love. I started looking at it, I'm like, it's got pretty good bones, it's nice and straight. I love the two-door body style, it's cool. Let's LS swap it. As the world was shutting down last year, I went down to the pick and pull and snagged out a 5.3 from a Suburban, slammed in a Sloppy Stage 2 cam. That's it. I mean, it's a stock 706 head, 5.3, shoved it in here, 8.8, twin traction rear end out of a 96-ish to 2001 Ford Explorer. I don't know, I don't speak Ford Explorer. It's the one you want. Most of them came with either 373 gears or 410 gears. This is a 373 flavor. Came with a limited slip, practically a bolt-in for these Blazers, but what I did was I narrowed it. They're actually an offset pumpkin, so they're longer on one side than the other. So if you cut out, I think it's 2 7/8 inches-ish out of the long side and weld the tubes back together, You can use the short side axle in the long side, and it will be near as makes any difference to the width of the original 7.5 10 bolt that came out of this thing. Made the cut right here next to that U-bolt. You can kind of see where it nicks down a little bit because I went at it with the flap disc like crazy because I'm a terrible welder and it looked awful. And I had a lot of slag inclusions, so I had to weld for a while, flap disc it down, find any of the little pinholes I had, weld them up. So I spent a lot of time on it, and you know, I was real concerned that it wouldn't hold, but so far it's been great. You get disc brakes with it. I already had disc brakes, but these are maybe a little better. Ford emergency brakes, parking brakes are a real pain. I can't stand them. But I rebuilt them, put them all in there. Everything works. E-brake works. Brakes are perfect. I mean, the brakes work great on this thing. 180 bucks I'm into this thing. It was dirt cheap. So the moral of the story with using a 110 welder to, you know, burn that thing together is don't feel like you're limited by your skills or your equipment, because just do it. If it breaks, it was $180. Go get another one, try it again. This is where it's at. It's still not done yet. I'm about to have a son any minute now. I want to, you know, take my kids out, go to Cars and Coffee, go to cruise nights, go do Hot Rod Power Tour, put some nitrous on it. I bought this thing for $500. I sold the engine and transmission for $400, sold the rear end for $50. I bought the truck for 50 bucks. The engine was $280. Transmission was $180. The rear end was another $180. The cam, oil pan, and mounts and headers, $700 for all of it. I bought the harness, the tack module, the pedal, all of that for 15 bucks. The ECU was 15 bucks. I had this elbow laying around in a box. This is the original Vortec V6 throttle or air box here, and this tube of ABS plastic I found laying in my garden, and I washed it, cleaned it up, stuck it on there, it fit perfectly. Didn't even have to cut it. The thing's literally built out of garbage, and it's a blast. I mean, I spent hours and hours with wiring diagrams, hooking everything up in this thing, trying to integrate it all seamlessly to make it all work like it would if the factory built it, and it drives down the road like it did before. I mean, just cruises down the road perfectly. Everything works except a couple little things, minor details.
Technically, I've driven it further than you at this point.
You say that on camera.
I mean,
technically, Brian has driven this thing more than I have. Junkyard 5.3 out of a Suburban with somewhere between 50,000 and 450,000 miles on it. I followed the sloppy mechanics rule. If you look at the cam bearings, they're bad, so I didn't look at them. Jammed the sloppy stage 2 cam in it, and that's about it. I mean,
and then we got open headers.
Open headers. Chinese eBay headers. Fancy $30 Amazon plug wires.
And then the Ford 8.8.
That has so far survived a lot of axle hop.
Pretty significant amount of axle hop.
I'm pretty impressed my welds held through that, because I am not a good welder.
That's what somebody who's decent at welding says. Like, I'm not a good welder. But if you say you're awesome at welding,
then you're really, really bad at welding. All I've got is a little FluxCore 110 welder. I mean, the one that I traded the old green diesel for.
Really?
Yeah.
Same one?
Yeah. You had it in your garage for like a year.
Yeah.
Like you were using it to put together a Beetle of some sort.
Yeah, it was like a rat rod.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that thing. I forgot about that.
I'm sad that it's
sad that it never came to fruition.
R.I.P.
I figured the 7.5 rear end wasn't going to live very long, and if I was going to spend money to get the drive shaft made for it, I'm not going to do it twice. So that was a big point of decision on getting this thing roadworthy. That's pretty nice, really. I mean, it wanders everywhere because it's a, you know.
I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
How much nitrous are you going to put through it?
Just a baby little 125 shot.
At first, and then eventually more and more and more?
Yeah. Well, you know. It's still just a Junkyard 5.3. Which, you know, they're disposable. But it's There's way more that goes into fitting one of these things into an S10 than I had initially planned or
Yeah.
thought it would be, you know. It's a tight fit. Totally untuned. I went on the HP Tuners repository and found something that was a 5.3 with a somewhat close cam spec. Adjusted for the injectors, I got 33-pound E85 injectors in it. And just got it somewhat close and made it idle. And that's all it's running right now. I don't even have a place to put oxygen sensors, so forget about tuning it right now. And a lot of why I built this thing is just I started playing with tuning a little bit when I did the cam swap on my Suburban and everything, and I really wanted to learn a lot more about automotive electronics and fuel injection and everything. That cam comes in like a turbo at $3 grand.
And I'm gonna tell you what, I didn't know what you were talking about with the vibrating your feet.
Yeah.
And dude, yeah, it's like a foot massager. Can you just hold it wide open for a little while longer? Yeah. Yes.
There's a lot of satisfaction that goes into, you know, starting a project, not really knowing what I'm doing, and then driving it. Spent hours and hours looking at wiring diagrams. I built my own harness completely out of a 07 Express van, wiring harness, the PCM's out of an 07 Express van, transmissions out of the same van. I fully understand why companies that supply parts to LS Swap S10s charge so much for a harness. Like there's a lot that goes into it, and to try to make everything work, I wanted it to all work like factory. Really the only dings I found so far are the oil pressure gauge and the fuel gauge. In the PCM, I've got it programmed to a 19-gallon tank, and it says it's got 26 gallons in it. And the oil pressure is 144 PSI with the key off. So I got some things to figure out there, but other than that, like, I couldn't be happier right now.
This thing's badass.
This thing could easily be a daily driver. Like, it drives like it did with a 4.3 in it, just a whole lot louder and much faster.
That is awesome. That worked. That worked finally. I bet it did. I mean, you got like dangerously close to doing some more drywall. Worth it.
You'll never have a bigger smile on your face than when you put all this together and you hammer this thing down the road for the first time. There's nothing like it.